Today we are taking a look back at the Sony FS5 Mark I. It's almost 10 years old, but how good is it in 2025 and later? Well, let's first start with the price, because you can find these used for about 1,000 euros, and that really depends on the condition, if it comes with lenses, because sometimes you see them with something broken, which isn't really a good sign, because these cameras can sometimes be used a lot. So for example, sometimes the click button is broken or it doesn't come with the top handle. But if you get one, make sure you get one that is in a good condition. So for a cinema camera, that price is pretty cheap, but it is also a pretty outdated camera. For shooting modes, it can shoot in XAVC at 50 megabits per second in Full HD with 10-bit color. However, 10-bit isn't supported in 4K. In 4K it can go up to 100 megabits per second, so obviously those codecs aren't amazing, but that doesn't mean that the image quality of the FS5 is bad. You can still get some really nice results. But first let's start with the build of this camera. It feels pretty well built and it has a really nice and compact design. When I got it first, I was really surprised at how small this camera actually is. When you take off the top handle, side handle, you only have a small box. But keep in mind, it doesn't have an internal microphone and no 3.5mm jack. The internal microphone is on the top handle and also with the microphone holder. It has a single XLR port on the top handle and also one on the back of the camera. But there's no 3.5mm jack, so that means that when you take off the top handle you don't have any audio at all, and the only way to get good audio is through the XLR port. Other than that, the build quality is great. You have all these controls right here. A lot of people like the ergonomics of the FS5, but I'm not really that big of a fan, because I want to hold my camera like this and focus, but this is a square unlike the FS100 and FS700, so when I hold it, I constantly feel it here in my hand. And also the autofocus manual focus switch is a little bit too far back for my liking. So when I want to switch between auto and manual focus with the same hand, that gets a bit difficult, which is kind of annoying. And unlike something like the FS700, it only has 3 programmable buttons on the body itself. On the side handle there are 3 other programmable buttons, but only 3 on the body can definitely feel a bit limiting. The nice thing is that it has the ISO, white balance and shutter right here. So if you have used some other professional Sony cameras, you can easily get used to these, because they are in about the same place. And what I also dislike is this flap for the XLR controls. Like, why does this need to be here? Why do I need to open it, then adjust and then close it? But there is one special thing about this camera that changes the way you shoot with a camera, and that is the variable ND filter. A lot of people say great things about it, and I think it's amazing as well. You just turn it on and you don't have to worry about anything. Normally you switch between fixed NDs, but this one, it is variable and it can even do it automatically, which is much nicer than having a polarizer at the front of your lens. And now I don't need to buy an ND filter for every single lens. This is an amazing solution and I wish more cameras had it. And when you switch the ISO gain function on the camera, you will hear a click, which can be also noticed in the audio. So that's why I mostly prefer to set the ISO gain on automatic mode. What's also amazing about this camera and most other camcorders is the battery. This is a small battery, but you can also use big ones. So if you don't want the camera to get heavy, you can just put in a small battery. But if you want to shoot all day, then you can put in a large one. So you have that choice on what you want. The only downside is that compared to the NPF batteries, the BPU batteries can be a little bit more expensive. But other than that, I really like them. Here on the side you have dual SD card slots, which is a really nice function to have. So if you want to record simultaneously on multiple SD cards, or if you want to, you can record from the first to the second SD card. It also has this screen. I don't think the quality is too nice of it. It is okay for previewing, but it's not the biggest. But what is nice is the flexibility. So it is connected with this cable. I like to have my screen on this position on the left, because it feels like I am using a camcorder. But if you want to, you can also put it in other different positions. I have the cable clipped in here, but you can remove them. And now you can position it anywhere. So now I've moved the screen to the back and you can have it here. And there's here a little switch, so you can switch the display orientation. What I also like is this white balance feature. You can just press the white balance button, select the A or B on the switch, and then you can hit the white balance set button and it will automatically adjust the white balance to the right temperature. The lens options are really nice on this camera. It has the Sony E mount, which means that you can mount almost any lens on here. Right now I have a tiny, cheap TT Artisan 17mm f1.4 lens on here. It is a manual lens, so it is nice for manual focusing. But if you want a large zoom, you can have that option. So you can get the 18-105 f4 or the 18-200 3.5 to 6.3 on this camera. You have so much flexibility. In my opinion, the autofocus of the FS5 is just really bad. So keep that in mind. That's why I have a manual focus lens on here right now. Yes, you can sometimes use autofocus in some situations if you're shooting at, for example, a higher aperture, but then what's the point of having the variable ND system if you're shooting at higher apertures anyways? If you're someone who just like to shoot in full auto, point and shoot, this is not the camera for you. Something like the Sony AX700 will be a better option because that has much better autofocus compared to this camera. And the colors straight out of camera with no picture profile, I don't really like them. I think they look pretty ugly, but luckily it does have a lot of picture profile customization. And it also has picture profile 10, which is the HLG one. I like to shoot with that one the most, because when I shoot in S-Log2 or S-Log3 a lot of noise will appear and the image almost looks a bit purple, but in HLG it still looks fine. And in my opinion, the HLG profile is a good balance between having not too much noise but also not having a terrible dynamic range. And then later I don't need to edit the colors, it just looks good straight out of camera. But in the HLG sometimes I do feel the green color can be a bit oversaturated. The menu system isn't the best, it works, but sometimes it takes a while to find an option. And some options are grayed out and you don't know why. The ease of use of this camera is good if you have used it for a while, but if it's the first time you definitely need to get used to it because it only has 3 customizable buttons. It has a lot of buttons also on the side, so for me it took a while to get used to this. But how is the image quality of the FS5 in 2025? Well, in my opinion it still looks really nice. Even when you shoot in only 1080p, the 1080p of this camera is a really high quality, nice 1080p image. It doesn't look extremely soft, it has a nice amount of detail. And if you don't want the biggest file size, it also has AVC HD options. But you do want to shoot in the XAVC format for the nicest image quality. And the 4K images out of this camera, even though it's only 8-bit, it still looks really nice. A lot of people complain about this camera not having 10-bit in 4K, but as someone who doesn't color grade their images, I don't really mind it, because 8-bit still looks fine. It also has a really nice 14 stops of dynamic range, so the difference between the highlights and the shadows can look really nice. But what I don't like is that this camera can get really noisy really fast. So the low light of this camera is not good at all. Even something like the old Sony FS100 has better low light performance than this camera. So if you want a clean image, you probably want to stick to 18 dB, 21 dB maybe. So it's not a low light camera at all. It also has some really nice 240 FPS slow motion options, but in my opinion the 240 FPS images do look worse than the 25 FPS images. Maybe I don't use the right settings, but the 1080p 200 FPS looks a little bit soft. And it only shoots that in bursts. The last thing to keep in mind is that this camera has no stabilization at all. It does have the nice ND filters, and because this camera is pretty big you won't get those tiny micro jitters in the shot when you're using a wide angle lens. But you definitely want to get lenses that have stabilization in them, especially if you don't have the most stable hands. So should you still buy the FS5? Well, it really depends on who you are, because it has features that a lot of other cameras these days don't have. For example, the XLR ports, the ability to have a small or large battery, the amazing ND filters, the ability to move the screen where you like. Those are things that you don't find on something like the FX30 for example. But that thing has a lot of other nice features, for example better autofocus. So it really depends on what you need and also on how much you can find them for on the used market. If you can find one for a good price, this can still be a really nice option. To get a good image out of this camera it takes some time. But when you take the time, the images that you can get out of it are still really nice. So what do you think of the Sony FS5? Do you still have it, or are you planning on buying it? Or do you still use it? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching.